What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Over Analysis. Today we're talking about the Minnesota Vikings, their fantasy relevant players, and whether or not we are targeting or fading them in our drafts this summer. At quarterback, J.J. McCarthy was one of the biggest busts in all of fantasy football last year. And McCarthy was a popular late-round quarterback pick for fantasy managers a year ago, and the reason for that was head coach Kevin O'Connell has just had such a history of getting the most out of his quarterbacks. Guys like Nick Mullins, Josh Dobbs, and obviously Sam Darnold 2 years ago all have thrived at times in O'Connell's system, so the expectation was that J.J. McCarthy, being a former first-round pick, would be able to do the same, if not better, than those other guys. And that was just not the case. McCarthy in 10 games threw for just 1,600 yards with 10 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. And McCarthy really was just that bad. I can't emphasize that enough. To the point where it just wasn't a feasible option at all for him to return as the starting quarterback for the team this year. So the Vikings go out and address the position in the offseason. They go out, they bring in Kyler Murray from the Arizona Cardinals. And while the Vikings say that this is a quarterback competition in training camp, plain and simple, the expectation is that Murray comes away with the job sooner rather than later. And Murray had just played his way out of his job in Arizona. There's been a lot more bad with Kyler lately than good. Murray has only finished as a QB1 one time in the last 4 seasons. And along the way, he's kind of dragged his skill position guys down with him. Look at what happened with Trey McBride. It wasn't until Murray was on the bench and Jacoby Brissett was in the starting lineup last year that McBride was finally fully unlocked and suddenly able to score touchdowns in the red zone. Same thing for guys like Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson. There's been so many throws that Kyler has just outright missed over the last couple years. But I don't think we would have gotten the Trey McBride breakout last season if Kyler Murray had kept the job, and I certainly don't think we would have gotten the Michael Wilson breakout with Murray on the field last season either. So what do we make of this situation? We have Kyler here, who obviously has a world of talent. He was once the top pick in the draft, and he has shown in the past that he's capable of playing football at a high level. And we also have a coach that's had a history of getting the most out of his veteran quarterbacks, including other first-round disappointments like Sam Darnold in the past. Kyler also has everything that he needs to succeed at the skill positions. Justin Jefferson, still one of the top receivers in the league. Jordan Addison, a very good number 2. Juwan Jennings comes over in free agency. TJ Hockenson still here at tight end. So there's plenty of weapons for Kyler to work with. And one of the most attractive things about Kyler Murray's game has always been his rushing ability. Rushing is such a great asset for a fantasy quarterback to have. It helps give guys like Kyler a floor on the weeks that they're not hitting the high-end passing numbers. And the price tag on Kyler Murray is completely reasonable. He's coming in right now as the quarterback 17, so he's very much in play for a wait on quarterback build. So with all that, there's absolutely a case to be made that Kyler can far exceed this ADP and push for a return to a QB1 finish. That being said, Kyler for me is ultimately going to be a fade. I've just seen too much bad and frustrating Kyler Murray play over the last half decade for me to want to invest in him as my late round quarterback. In that same range, there's much safer options that are also going to far exceed their ADP. The Jared Goffs, Baker Mayfield, Tyler Shuck. Give me all those guys over Kyler, but I do completely understand the case for Murray, and I don't hate it if he's the guy that you want to target. Certainly, of all these late round quarterback guys, Murray has the biggest upside to offer with his legs, and plugging him into this great system of Kevin O'Connell's, you could definitely do a lot worse at the quarterback position. At running back, the Vikings do not have a good situation going into 2026. This is still going to be a split backfield between Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason. With Aaron Jones, it was a struggle for him to stay healthy last year, and even when he was on the field, he was showing some pretty obvious signs of decline. The Vikings did bring him back for one more year, but there's already been a lot of talk that he could be very limited to passing down work this season. And while it's great that Jones is still going to be able to get the high-value touches in the receiving game, but his total workload could be so small that it's not going to make him a startable option for us most weeks. With Jordan Mason, though, I do think there's a little more of a case for him to carry some upside this season. Coming in as the RB41 right now, Mason did have an opportunity last season to be the starting running back while Jones was out. However, Mason was ultimately just hampered by the poor quarterback play and the bad offensive environment that the Vikings had last year. For a guy like Mason to produce for us in fantasy, he's got to be playing for a good offense that's going to be playing ahead, or at least getting down to the red zone and giving him opportunities to score on the goal line. Last season, the Vikings just weren't doing that. So if Kyler Murray is the starting quarterback, and he will be, then it should raise the Vikings offense to a level where they're at least competent. And that could lead to more goal line opportunities for Jordan Mason. And at that point, you're talking about a guy that you can occasionally plug into your RB2 spot or flex spot, or he'll be a useful bye week fill-in. But Jordan Mason in the later rounds as the RB41 is somebody that I do have interest in. And then at wide receiver, I don't think anyone suffered more from J.J. McCarthy and the bad quarterback play than Justin Jefferson last season. And Jefferson last season finishes as the wide receiver 21. He still managed to catch over 80 passes for over 1,000 yards, but what really hurt him was the touchdowns just cratered for him with a career low 2. And if Kyler Murray is a sight for sore eyes for anybody, it's going to be Justin Jefferson. Jefferson right now being drafted as the wide receiver 6, I think that's a completely reasonable price tag for him. Jefferson I think is very safe. I think he's going to finish as a wide receiver 1 as long as he gets competent quarterback play. I don't know that he's got a ceiling to finish in the top 5, top 3 at the position. Murray, like I said, still has his limitations. But with Jefferson, he's traditionally been such a safe option, and the only year, other than last season, that he has not finished as a wide receiver 1 was the year 2 seasons ago where he gets hurt and only plays in 10 games. So Jefferson as wide receiver 6, I'm completely fine with. Another victim of the J.J. McCarthy situation was Jordan Addison, who last season finishes as the wide receiver 45 after finishing as a wide receiver 2 in each of his first 2 seasons. Addison this year being drafted as the wide receiver 47, not a terrible flyer to take, but there's other guys that are going in that range that I just prefer more than him. I think I'd rather have Jaden Reed, I'd rather have Jaden Higgins. Those 2 guys I think have better floors than Addison, but also similar ceilings, whereas with Addison, I look at him as a poor man's Jameson Williams, a guy who is occasionally going to have these spiked weeks that could swing matchups for you, but his floor is also considerably lower, and there's weeks where he could literally be a 0 in your lineup. So Addison, for me, I don't hate drafting him where he's going, but there's just other guys that I prefer around him. Another guy that really suffered because of the offensive situation last year was TJ Hockenson. And with Hockenson, he was barely targeted at all last season. A lot of times, the Vikings were forced to keep him in as an extra blocker because their offensive line was so bad. The good news with Hockenson is he's now completely free in drafts. You don't have to pay up to get him. He's not a terrible late-round tight end swing. Keep in mind, this was a guy who just a couple of years ago was the tight end 4 in fantasy, and he's thrived in this Kevin O'Connell system in the past as well. I think there's probably too many targets in the Vikings offense now for him to really return to being a must-start at the tight end position. He's got to compete with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and also Juwan Jennings, who they signed in free agency, for targets now. But I think there's going to be weeks where Hockenson is absolutely streamable. You just can't plan on building your tight end position around him anymore. And that's going to do it for this one, guys. So the Minnesota Vikings are definitely an interesting team from a fantasy perspective. Kyler Murray's price tag isn't bad. Justin Jefferson's is perfectly all right as well. And there's a chance that things really go right for this Kevin O'Connell offense and it bounces back to the level that we saw it at a couple of years ago. I myself don't find that I get a lot of exposure to them just because there ends up being other guys that I prefer that I think have a little higher ceilings than some of the Vikings players. But I certainly don't have any issue with drafting these guys where they're going. But I thank you guys so much for watching, and we will talk to you next time when we go over the Chicago Bears.